We have nothing against David Pakman. In fact, we love David Pakman, but he made a huge mistake in a recent video that allows us to look at a pressing issue in the 2024 election. Let's see if you can spot the mistake. Take it away, David.
Well, it's been about a week, I guess, since we last talked about the potential political impact of Taylor Swift. And now the new Republican concerns are focusing in on the state of Florida. Imagine Taylor Swift does endorse Joe Biden and says, register to vote, go out and vote. Imagine that leads to about imagine that leads to a 10% increase in turnout among the youngest voters. Okay. That'd be like 118,000 extra young voters turning out thanks to Taylor Swift. And then in addition to new young voters registering, maybe her endorsement of Biden convinces an additional 30,000, this is just in Florida, an additional 30,000 Floridians to vote Biden. We'll call it 5% of swing voters. So you've got your 120 new and 30 swing. So that's about 150,000 vote swing. Now, the problem is that the margin for Trump in 2020 was actually bigger. It was a margin of about 300 and something thousand. So just kind of like if she increases young registration by 10% and flips 5% of swing voters, that's half the margin in Florida. The reason Republicans are so afraid is that the numbers may be even bigger.
The other reason they're afraid is you made a mistake that make the numbers even bigger. Did you catch the mistake he made? Bet a lot of you did. A lot of you are already typing, telling me, that's an easy mistake. But a lot of you didn't. And so think about it for the next 30 seconds or so while you watch this. So, did you catch it? Welcome to another episode of LAN, Permanent Majority's coverage of the 2024 election that goes beyond the horse race and looks deep, deep, deep into the numbers. This episode is another great example of that. Did you catch it? I think a lot of you did, but a lot of you didn't, and don't be embarrassed. I have seen lots of people make this mistake. I've definitely seen cable news anchors make this mistake. Even network news anchors make this mistake. And I've definitely seen people on campaigns actually make this mistake. It's a very basic mathematical fact, but it's counterintuitive for a number of reasons. I had a teacher in high school who said, whenever someone was trying to solve a math problem, he'd say, put a dollar sign in front of it. And that often made it easier for them to figure it out. So in light of that, we're going to use a little visual aid to explain this math problem, and we're going to use numbers. So here we go. Imagine your friend has 4 quarters and you have none. You go around the house searching for quarters. And finally, under the couch cushions, you find 2 quarters. But you're one of those guys who likes to be even Steven with your friend. And you don't know where you're going to get those other quarters. You've searched everywhere, and you just feel you're never going to get there. You're never going to be equal with your friend. Now, let's look at this in a slightly different way. Your friend still has 4 quarters, but instead of searching for quarters of your own, you shift 2 of his quarters to your pile. And look what happens. Now you're even Steven. You both have the same number of quarters. Did you figure out what those quarters have to do with elections? Let's bring up some pictures of Taylor Swift while we talk about that. First, because she's central to this issue, her influence in politics, her influence on the 2024 election. But also because, and maybe more importantly, because MAGA people get so upset when they see her. We don't know why, but they do. Anyway, I think you see the the point. If you change the mind of a voter, you get a 2x impact. If you get someone who voted Republican last time to vote for Democratic or vice versa, it's a much bigger impact than if you bring in a new voter. But it's more than a 2x impact. And this is something politicians figured out and political strategists figured out. Because oftentimes the person you convince influences a larger group of people. They may be the head of a family. They may be prominent in their church group. They may belong to a golf club or society or Rotary Club where people listen to them. And so what happens is the 2x impact becomes 4x, 8x, and so forth. And so in the 20th century, you rarely see two close elections in a row. In fact, after 1950, you only have two truly close elections, 1960 and 1972, and they were followed by two of the biggest landslides in U.S. history. 1964 and 1972. We have to put a little caveat by 1972 because, of course, Nixon broke some laws and had to resign because of stuff he'd done during that election. But the point holds true. The strategy was the same, and you see it continue in the 80s and 90s. But then something strange happened. Social scientists began to see that the demographics, the way they were shifting in this country, would mean that there would be a permanent Democratic majority sometime in the 21st century for the presidency and maybe both houses of Congress as well. Somebody else noticed this and noticed some other important facts. And I'm sorry I have to do this. I have to go from Taylor Swift to this guy. He's been called Bush's brain. Bush himself called him a turd blossom. It is, of course, former chief strategist and White House advisor to President George W. Bush, Karl Rove. Here he is on a day that progressives cheered. This is the day he resigned in 2007. And Karl Rove, despite being our nemesis, was a brilliant political strategist and someone who understood demographics at a deep, deep level. And he knew something. He knew about what I just discussed. He knew about the coming Democratic majority. But he also knew something even more important. He knew that because of this, convincing Democratic voters to vote for a Republican was going to be very difficult, nigh impossible. So he came up with a strategy. And as they would say in the old BBC documentaries, his solution was both revolutionary and radical. His solution was this. He could create a demographic profile of a potential Bush voter, their age, their income status, the region in the state or the county or the city. And so rather than attempting to convince a Democratic voter to vote for George Bush, he would search out these potential Bush voters by this demographic profile and get them out to vote, get them to the polls, often non-voters. Now, of course, I think you can see the problem. We saw it with our quarter example. It's difficult. It doesn't have that exponential impact. In fact, because these are non-voters, they rarely are part of a cohort where they influence a large group of people. They rarely have that social group that listens to them because they're not active people. They're not activists. They haven't voted in many cases. So what happened in 2000? Well, we all know. George Bush won, but lost the popular vote and all kinds of stuff, shenanigans. The Supreme Court had to decide it. But it gave the Republicans another shot at the White House, and that was important. So I think you can see where we're going here with this. This is one of the key reasons permanent majority was created. We saw that the majority of America sided with progressive causes that were in line with the Democratic Party. And we wanted to make that majority into a permanent voting majority for the Democratic Party and make progressive causes the permanent majority focus of the Democratic Party. Because all of that goes to the root of protecting the rights of American citizens and our very democracy itself. But this work doesn't happen in a vacuum, and it isn't free. We know you know that. That's why we urge you to visit our website, permanentmajority.us. That's permanentmajority.us. Follow all of our social media accounts, and don't wait. Don't wait. Donate. Your donations amplify your voice and desires for 2024 and beyond, and make it clear to yourself and the world that when our rights need to be protected, when our very democracy needs to be protected, you did not sit on the sidelines. You said, "Put me in, coach. I need to play." And there you go. That's why Permanent Majority was created. But what does this all have to do with David Pakman and Taylor Swift? I know you've been wondering that. Well, we're going to get to that in just a second, but let's talk about something else first. Let's talk about this.
Breaking news right now. The Associated Press calling New York's 3rd congressional district for Tom Suozzi, the Democrat, winning back the seat he once held with more than 50% of the vote. We have Fox 5 live team coverage tonight.
Thank God. Let me just enjoy this for one more minute, okay? Despite all the attacks, despite all the lies about Tom Suozzi and the squad, about Tom Suozzi being the godfather of the migrant crisis, about Sanctuary Suozzi, despite the dirty tricks, despite the vaunted Nassau County Republican machine, we won.
Okay, that was a big win for the Democrats. And now let's just take a look at those numbers. There we go. New York 3rd. And first, let's look at that flipped seat. Of course, this was George Santos' seat, a man who was too big a liar even for the Republican Party. And now let's see those numbers. Okay, 53.9 to 46.1. That's a impressive victory, almost 8%. And it's even more impressive when you look at this. Here's the polling leading up. There were 3 big polls in the last couple months. And you see there, it's like a 4, and a 3. All of those, well, this one is slightly outside the margin of error, but both of these are this is like 1/10 outside, very close to the margin of error. And that's why Republicans, thought they had this thing. They were very optimistic. Of course, that's not what happened. What ended up happening is, even if you take these numbers as gospel, he doubled them. And we think one of the causes for that may be this quarter phenomenon, this 2x plus phenomenon where we've been talking about. Because especially in special elections like this, people do go to their friends. And even though Suozzi is known in the area, in special elections, people often ask, they're informed, their politically savvy friend, should I go for him again? What about this new person? They used to be a Democrat. Are they okay? Are they say they're not a Trumpy? What should I do? Well, clearly people listened, and clearly the Democrats scored a big victory this week. And now let's finally get to what you've all been waiting, what you've been sitting around here for over 10 minutes waiting for. What did David Pakman get wrong? Some of you have probably already figured it out. And while you're yelling at me and typing in the comments, hit the like button and definitely hit subscribe. We need subscribers badly. And then once you've subscribed, ring-a-ling that ding-a-ling bell, because that allows you to get all the notifications. Now let's bring up Taylor once again as we talk about Mr. Pakman. Now, first off, he got the major point right. He suggested how new voters would affect the outcome. He had about 120,000. I think it was 118, but he rounded it up later on. And then he talked about 30% shifting. And there's where he made the mistake, right? We all know it now. It basically has a 2x impact. So where he said it was 150,000 difference, the actual impact is more like 180. It's not actually 180. It's with a shift. But what it means is he said we're with those numbers, we're halfway, Trump's lead halfway to catching up. We are in fact 2/3 of the way, and as you can calculate by what we've discussed here, just a few shifts means we're all the way there. This, of course, does mean changing voters' minds, and we'll talk about how you do that and when not to do that. We've discussed that a little bit in a previous video. We'll talk about that more. But right now, while we've got your attention, that video in the lower left, right under Taylor's leg, click it. Click it right now. Come on, click it. Click it. Did you click it?